My name is Ethel, and I'm 57 years old. For the past 6 months, I thought I knew exactly who was living under my roof. My daughter in law Sarah had moved in while my son David, an airline pilot, flew routes across the globe. We cooked together, laughed together, shared our days like mother and daughter. Then one Friday morning, my phone rang. David's voice was shaking. Mom, is Sarah home? Yes, she's in the shower, I said. His next word stopped my heart. That's impossible. She just boarded my plane to Paris. I'm looking at her right now. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe. You won't believe who was actually living in my house. I've lived in my two-story house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, for nearly 30 years. My husband passed away 12 years ago in a car accident when David was only 20. Those early years of grief were dark. I was a nurse at our local hospital working long shifts to keep myself busy to avoid the empty spaces in our home where my husband's laughter used to fill the rooms. But time, as they say, has a way of softening even the sharpest edges of pain. I retired 5 years ago, and slowly I built a new rhythm. My days became gentle. I tended my flower garden, planted roses and dahlias that bloomed in brilliant colors each spring. I read mysteries on my front porch swing. I met my book club friends every other Thursday at the coffee shop downtown. David became my pride and joy. He was always a determined boy, focused and ambitious. He studied aviation at the State University, worked 2 jobs to pay his way through flight school, and by the time he was 28, he'd earned his captain's stripes with a major airline. He stands 6 feet 2 inches tall, with sun-tanned skin, from layovers in tropical destinations, piercing blue eyes he inherited from his father, and a warm smile that could light up any room. Watching him succeed gave my life purpose after the tragedy. 3 years ago, David called me one Sunday afternoon. Mom, I want you to meet someone special. My heart jumped. I'd been hoping for this. He brought her to dinner that very evening. Her name was Sarah. She was 29 years old with honey blonde hair that fell just past her shoulders, deep brown eyes that sparkled when she smiled, and a gentle demeanor that put me at ease immediately. She wore a simple blue dress and brought homemade cookies still warm from her oven. I'm a third-grade teacher, she told me as we set the table together. I love working with children. They see the world with such wonder. Sarah asked about my nursing career, genuinely interested in the stories I shared about delivering babies and comforting families in the emergency room. She had this quality, this attentiveness that made you feel heard. As the evening progressed, David couldn't stop looking at her, his hand finding hers across the table. I could see it in his eyes. This was love. Later, as we cleared the dishes, Sarah helped me in the kitchen. She confided in me quietly. I lost my mother when I was 8 years old. My grandmother raised me, but she passed away when I was 19. I don't have any other family. David is everything to me. My heart ached for her. I reached over and squeezed her hand. You have family now, I said. You have us. They married 10 months later in a small ceremony at our neighborhood church. It was an intimate gathering, just a handful of close friends and a few of David's pilot colleagues. I helped Sarah prepare everything. We shopped for her wedding dress together, a simple ivory gown with lace sleeves. We baked the 3-tiered cake ourselves, laughing when the second layer nearly slid off. We arranged white lilies and baby's breath in mason jars for the reception. Seeing her walk down the aisle toward my son, I felt a fullness I hadn't experienced since my husband's death. I wasn't just gaining a daughter-in-law. I was gaining a daughter. The first year of their marriage was beautiful. They rented an apartment 30 minutes from my house, and every weekend they'd drive over for Sunday brunch. Sarah would bring fresh blueberry muffins or cinnamon rolls she'd baked early that morning. She'd tell me stories about her students, about the little boy who insisted on wearing his superhero cape to class every day, or the girl who wrote a poem about her pet turtle. David would grill burgers in my backyard, and we'd eat on the patio, surrounded by my blooming garden. Those were golden days. Simple, uncomplicated, filled with warmth. Then 6 months ago, everything shifted. David's flight schedule became increasingly demanding. He was assigned more international routes, long-haul flights to Tokyo, London, Dubai, Paris. He'd be gone for 3, sometimes 4 days at a time. Sarah called me one evening, her voice tight with anxiety. "Mom, I'm scared staying alone in the apartment at night. Last week, someone knocked on the door at midnight. I didn't answer, but it happened 3 times. And yesterday I heard footsteps in the hallway outside our unit. It's probably nothing, but I just feel so uneasy." Without hesitation, I offered our spare bedroom. "Come stay with me while David's away. You shouldn't be alone if you're frightened." Her relief was immediate. "Really? Oh, Mom, thank you so much. I'll pack a bag tonight." She arrived the next morning with just one small suitcase. "I'm leaving most of my things at the apartment," she explained. "This is just temporary until David's schedule calms down." Having Sarah in the house transformed my days once again. We fell into an easy routine. We cooked dinner together, experimenting with new recipes. We watched old movies, curled up on the couch with blankets and popcorn. We worked in the garden, her hands in the soil beside mine, planting vegetables for the summer. She helped me organize my closets, laughing at my hoarding of outdated nursing textbooks. In the evenings, we'd sit on the porch with iced tea, talking about everything and nothing. She became the daughter I'd never had. I felt blessed. But over time, small things began to feel slightly off. Little details that didn't quite match my memories. It started with a conversation one Tuesday night. We were folding laundry in the living room, a mindless task that left room for easy chatter. I mentioned Sarah's friend Emily, the one she told me about months ago, who taught at the same school. "Remember when Emily's class won that reading competition?" I asked. "How's she doing these days?" Sarah looked up from the towel she was folding, her face blank. "Who's Emily? I've never mentioned anyone named Emily." I stopped mid-fold. "Yes, you did. Last Christmas you told me about her." Sarah shook her head slowly. "Mom, I think you might be mixing me up with someone else. I've never had a friend named Emily." Her tone was gentle but firm, as if correcting a confused child. I felt a flutter of doubt. Maybe I had gotten it wrong. My memory wasn't what it used to be. I let it go. A week later, I asked about her school. "How are things at Lincoln Elementary?" She was pouring coffee and her hand paused for just a fraction of a second. "It's going well," she said. But then I remembered. "Wait, didn't you say you teach at Jefferson Elementary?" I could picture her telling me that first dinner 3 years ago. Sarah turned to face me, her brow furrowed. "No, Mom. It's always been Lincoln. I worked there for 6 years. You must be tired. Maybe you should rest more." That comment stung. I wasn't senile. I was 57, not 87. But I doubted myself. Perhaps grief and age were catching up with me in ways I hadn't noticed. Still, the unease lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Other changes became apparent too. Sarah used to love baking. She'd arrive at my house with still warm banana bread or chocolate chip cookies almost every visit. But now she never baked. When I asked why, she said she was on a new diet, cutting out sugar and carbs. Yet, I'd never known Sarah to diet. She'd always had a healthy relationship with food, enjoying sweets without guilt. This felt inconsistent. Then there was her appearance. One morning she emerged from her bedroom with her hair cut into a sharp bob that ended just below her chin. I was startled. "Your hair? It's so short." She ran her fingers through it, smiling. "I needed a change." "Don't you like it?" "I do," I said carefully. "It's just surprising. You always said you hated short hair." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Did I? I don't remember saying that." People change their minds, Mom. Shortly after, she started wearing glasses. Thick-framed, dark prescription lenses. "I didn't know you needed glasses," I remarked. "My eyesight's gotten worse," she said with a shrug. "It happens." But I'd never seen her squint at a book or struggle to read signs. It seemed sudden, unexplained. Her behavior shifted as well. She became quieter, more withdrawn. She spent hours on her phone, scrolling through apps with a distant expression. When I'd ask about her day at school, her answers grew vague. It was fine, the kids were good, nothing specific. No more stories about individual students, no more animated descriptions of classroom projects. It was as if that spark, that passion she'd always had for teaching, had dimmed. One afternoon, I pressed a little. Tell me about your favorite student this year. She hesitated, her eyes darting away. There's this kid, Jake. He's sweet. What does Jake like to do? I asked. She shrugged. I don't know. He's just a good kid. Her lack of detail was strange. Teachers always have stories. They know their students intimately. This felt wrong. The final straw came 3 weeks ago. David called while I was in the garden weeding the rose beds. Mom, how's Sarah doing? She seems a bit off lately. I wiped sweat from my forehead. She's been quieter, I admitted. Maybe she's just tired from work. David hummed thoughtfully. That's weird. She sounded totally normal when I talked to her yesterday morning. My hand stilled. You talked to her yesterday morning? Yeah, around 8. Before my flight. I bit my lip. David? She didn't wake up until 10 yesterday. She slept in. Are you sure it was yesterday? There was a long pause. Yeah, Mom, I'm sure. We video called. She was in the apartment. I didn't argue, but confusion swirled in my mind. Sarah had been asleep in my guest room at 8 in the morning. I'd checked on her myself, seen her curled under the quilts. There was no way she'd been on a call with David. Unless I was losing my grip on reality, or unless something far stranger was happening. I tried to push the thought away, but it burrowed deep. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every odd moment, every discrepancy. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what. Friday morning arrived like any other. My alarm chimed at 6 the way it had for decades. I rose, washed my face dressed in my comfortable jeans and a cotton sweater. Downstairs, I started the coffee maker, its familiar gurgle filling the silent kitchen. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light through the window above the sink. I cracked eggs into a bowl, whisked them with milk and a pinch of salt, set bread in the toaster. At 7:15, I heard footsteps upstairs. Sarah's bedroom door creaked open. I glanced at the clock. She usually slept later on Fridays, her day off from school. A moment later, she appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her hair was tangled, her face puffy with sleep eyes, barely open. Morning, Mom, she mumbled. Can you make me some toast? Her voice sounded hoarse, different somehow. Of course, I replied, sliding 2 slices into the toaster. I'm going to take a shower, she said, turning back toward the stairs. I watched her go, that persistent unease prickling at the back of my neck. A minute later, I heard the bathroom door close upstairs, followed by the sound of water rushing through the pipes. I buttered the toast, set it on a plate, poured orange juice into a glass. The clock ticked forward. 7:25, 7:28, 7:30. The phone rang, the landline mounted on the kitchen wall. I glanced at the caller ID, David. I smiled, always happy to hear from my son, and picked up. Hi, honey, you're up early. His voice came through tight, strained. Mom, is Sarah home? I frowned at the odd question. Of course she's home. She's upstairs, taking a shower right now. Why? Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that makes your stomach drop. David, I prompted. Are you there? His next words were barely a whisper, as if he didn't want anyone nearby to hear. Mom, that's impossible. I'm standing at the gate right now. Sarah just boarded my plane. I looked at her passport myself. She's sitting in seat 12A, heading to Paris. The room tilted. My hand gripped the counter to steady myself. What no? David, that can't be. She's upstairs. I can hear the water running. His breathing was shallow, quick. Mom, I'm looking at her right now. It's Sarah. Same face, same ID, same everything. Then his voice dropped even lower. Who is in your house? The question punched through me like a fist. My throat went dry. I stared at the ceiling, at the spot directly above me, where the bathroom was. The water was still running. But who was in there? I don't know, I whispered. David's voice sharpened. Listen to me carefully. Don't do anything. Don't confront whoever that is. Lock yourself in your bedroom. I'm calling the police right now. Do you hear me, Mom? Lock yourself in. I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and tried to speak, but no sound came out. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the counter. My heart hammered against my ribs. The water stopped. Upstairs, the pipes groaned as the shower shut off. Footsteps moved across the bathroom floor. I stood frozen in the center of my kitchen, terror spreading through my veins like ice. The footsteps descended the stairs, slow, casual, unbothered. I forced myself to breathe to appear normal. She appeared in the doorway wrapped in a white bathrobe, her hair dripping wet, darkening the fabric at her shoulders. She smiled at me. Mom, are you okay? You look pale. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as sand. I just talked to David. Her eyebrows lifted. Oh, what did he say? I scrambled for words, trying to keep my voice steady. He said he's flying to Paris today. She nodded, completely calm. Yes, I know. He told me last night. Her tone was so casual, so normal, as if we were discussing the weather. But her eyes? There was something in her eyes. A coolness that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and I'd been too blind to see it. Mom, you're shaking. What's wrong? She stepped closer, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. I forced a smile, though it felt like my face might crack. Nothing. I'm just tired. Didn't sleep well. She studied me, tilting her head slightly like a predator, assessing prey. Are you sure? You seem upset. I nodded quickly. Yes, I'm sure. I think I'll go lie down for a bit. She didn't move from the doorway. Okay, I'll be down here if you need anything. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I walked past her, my legs trembling, climbed the stairs, went into my bedroom and closed the door. My hands shook as I turned the lock. I sank onto the edge of my bed, pressing my palms against my face. David said he was calling the police. How long would it take them to arrive? 5 minutes 10. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket, checking the time. 7:45. I could hear movement downstairs, footsteps crossing the kitchen floor, the clink of dishes, the scrape of a chair. She was acting as though nothing was wrong, as though this was just another ordinary morning. But it wasn't. Nothing about this was ordinary. And I had no idea who was living in my house. My bedroom became a cage. I sat on the edge of my bed, every muscle tense, listening to the sounds below. The refrigerator door opened and closed. A glass clinked against the counter. Footsteps moved from the kitchen to the living room. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, sounds that should have been comforting, but instead felt menacing. I clutched my phone, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for David to call back or for the police to arrive. Minutes stretched like hours. Then her voice drifted up the stairs. Mom, are you okay up there? My breath caught. I didn't answer. Maybe she'd think I'd fallen asleep. A pause. Then footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. She was right outside my door now. I stared at the lock, praying it would hold. A soft knock. I know you're awake. We need to talk. Something in her tone had shifted. It wasn't the gentle, sweet voice I'd grown accustomed to. It was harder, colder. I stood moving to the door, my hand hovering over the lock. Why should I open it? Who are you? Another pause. Then quietly, if I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it already. I've been living here for 6 months. That was true in a horrible way. Whatever was happening, she'd had countless opportunities to harm me and hadn't. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. She stood in the hallway, still in the bathrobe, arms crossed, leaning against the wall. Her face was expressionless now. No smile, no warmth, just a blank, unsettling calm. Let's go downstairs, she said. We'll talk in the living room. I followed her, keeping distance between us, my mind racing through possible escape routes. She settled into the armchair by the window. I remained standing near the doorway, ready to bolt if needed. Who are you? I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. She sighed, tilting her head back against the chair. I was hoping we could keep this going a little longer. It was nice, being part of a family, being cared for. You still haven't answered my question. She met my eyes, and for the first time I saw something there. sadness, anger, a deep aching bitterness. My name is Diane. Sarah and I are twins. The words didn't make sense at first. Twins. But Sarah said she had no family. Diane's laugh was harsh, half-truths. We were separated when we were 5 years old. Our parents divorced. It was ugly. Mom took Sarah and moved across the country. I stayed with our grandmother. Sarah got the good life. I got nothing. My mind spun. Twins? Identical twins. That explained the resemblance, the ability to fool everyone. But why? Your grandmother, I said slowly. Sarah told me she passed away. Diane nodded. She did. When I was 16. After that, I was on my own. Foster care for a while, dropped out of high school. Worked whatever jobs I could find. Survived. Her voice was flat, detached, as though recounting someone else's life. Meanwhile, Sarah went to college, became a teacher, got married, got you. She gestured around the room. Got all of this. I felt a pang of sympathy despite my fear. That must have been incredibly hard. Diane's eyes snapped to mine, sharp and cold. Don't pity me. I don't need your pity. I found her 2 years ago. Through social media. She was easy to track down. Perfect little life posted all over the internet. Photos of her and David on vacation. Photos of her classroom, photos of the two of you at brunch. She had everything I never did. And she never even tried to find me. Did you reach out to her? I asked. Diane nodded slowly. 6 months ago, I sent her a message. She was shocked, of course, happy even. We met up, she cried. Said she'd always wondered what happened to me. But when I asked if I could be part of her life, really part of it, she hesitated. She offered money, a loan to get me on my feet. But I didn't want her charity. I wanted what she had. So you proposed switching places, I said, the pieces falling together. Diane smiled, bitter and cold. I told her it would just be for a few weeks, a game. A way for me to experience what a normal life felt like. She didn't want to at first, but I played on her guilt. You had everything, while I had nothing. You owe me this. Eventually she agreed. We look almost identical. I cut my hair to match hers. Practiced her voice, learned her mannerisms. And 6 months ago, when she was supposed to move in with you, I came instead. Whereas Sarah, panic rose in my chest. She's fine. She's been living at your son's apartment, working remotely. Teaching her classes online because of the pandemic regulations. We swapped lives. She thought it would be temporary. But I liked it here. I liked being cared for, being part of something. So I kept stalling, telling her just a few more weeks. And she let me because she felt guilty. Because she thought she owed me. Diane stood walking to the window, looking out at the garden. But today she decided enough was enough. She had a trip to Paris planned months ago. She was going to take it, reclaim her life. I didn't think David would be her pilot. The cruelty of it struck me. Sarah had been manipulated, guilt-tripped into giving up her life, her identity. And Diane had stolen 6 months from all of us. You lied to me. You deceived my family. Diane turned, and for a moment, something like regret crossed her face. I did. But I didn't hurt anyone. I just wanted to know what it felt like to be loved, to belong somewhere. That's not an excuse. You took something that wasn't yours. She nodded slowly. I know. In the distance I heard sirens. Diane heard them too. Her expression tightened. The police? I called them off, I said quickly. I told them it was a misunderstanding. Her eyes narrowed, disbelieving. Why would you do that? Because I don't want Sarah dragged through this mess. Because exposing you means exposing what she did, the choice she made. And I don't want her hurt any more than she already has been. I stepped forward, my voice firm. You need to leave. Now, pack your things and disappear. Don't contact Sarah again. Don't come back here. Just go. Diane stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Okay. She walked past me, climbed the stairs, and 10 minutes later came down with the same small suitcase she'd arrived with. At the door she paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I wanted this so badly that I stopped caring who I hurt. I didn't respond. She stepped outside, and I closed the door behind her, locking it firmly. My hands were shaking. I sank onto the couch, staring at nothing, trying to process everything that had just happened. The sirens grew closer, then stopped a block away. My phone rang. David. Mom, are you safe? The police should be there any minute. I took a deep breath. I'm fine. It was a misunderstanding. Sarah's twin sister was here. They look identical. It was all a mix-up. Silence on the other end. Twin sister David's voice was strained. Sarah never mentioned a twin. I know. She'll explain everything. Where is she now on your plane heading to Paris? Or she was. Can you talk to her? David exhaled shakily. Yeah, I will. I'll call you back. He hung up. I sat in the silence of my home, the home that had been violated by lies, and waited for the truth to unfold. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. David. Mom, Sarah and I are coming home. We're not going to Paris. The airline is holding the flight, but we're getting off. We need to talk, all of us. Relief and dread warred inside me. Okay, I'll be here. When they arrived that afternoon, Sarah's face was streaked with tears. She rushed to me the moment she stepped inside, wrapping her arms around me tightly. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I held her, but my body was stiff-guarded. David stood in the doorway, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with confusion and anger. We sat in the living room, the three of us, and Sarah told us everything. She explained how Diane had found her, how the reunion had been bittersweet, how Diane's stories of hardship had broken her heart. I felt so guilty. Sarah said, her voice cracking. She had nothing. I had everything. When she asked if we could switch lives for just a few weeks, I thought it was harmless. A way for her to feel what it's like to be part of a family. I thought I owed her that. But it wasn't a few weeks. David said, his voice hard. It was 6 months. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. She kept saying she needed more time. And I felt so bad for her that I kept saying yes. I was stupid. I was weak. David ran a hand through his hair, standing pacing. You didn't trust me. You didn't think you could tell me. Sarah looked up at him, desperation in her eyes. I was ashamed. I didn't know how to explain it. I thought you'd think I was crazy. I spoke then, my voice quiet but firm. Sarah, family is built on trust. And you broke that trust. You let someone else live my life, David's life, without telling us. You put us all at risk. Sarah buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I know I did. I don't know how to fix it. David stopped pacing, looking at me, then at Sarah. We need time. We need space. This isn't something we can just move past. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. I felt a deep sadness settle over me. I loved Sarah. I truly did. But the foundation of our relationship had cracked, and I didn't know if it could be repaired. You should go home, I said gently. Both of you. Take some time. Figure out your marriage. We'll talk again when we're all ready. David helped Sarah to her feet, and they left quietly. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. The weeks that followed were hard. David and Sarah moved back to their apartment. They started attending marriage counseling, trying to navigate the betrayal and the secrets that had poisoned their relationship. Sarah called me often, her voice small and pleading. Mom, can we talk? Can I come over? I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed time to process, to grieve the loss of the relationship I thought we had. David called too, his anger gradually giving way to exhaustion. I love her, Mom, but I don't know if I can trust her again. I listened, offering what comfort I could, but I had no easy answers. Trust once broken is not easily mended. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to be vulnerable again. Whether they could do that, I didn't know. A month after the incident, Sarah came to visit. I opened the door and we stood there for a moment just looking at each other. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared so many meals, so many conversations. I'm sorry, she said again. I know I've said it 100 times, but I need you to know I mean it. I was selfish and foolish. I hurt you and I hurt David. I don't know how to make it right. I reached across the table, taking her hand. Sarah, I understand why you did it. Guilt is a powerful thing. But you have to understand that actions have consequences. You can't undo what happened. You can only move forward and do better. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I know. I'm trying. David and I are working through it. It's hard, but we're trying. What about Diane? I asked. Have you heard from her? Sarah shook her head. No. I hired a private investigator to find her just to make sure she's okay. But there's no trace. She's gone. Part of me felt relieved. Part of me felt sad. Diane was a victim too in her own way. A victim of circumstance, of abandonment, of a system that failed her. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. Sarah and I talked for hours that day. It wasn't easy. There were tears, hard truths, uncomfortable silences. But it was a start. Over the following months, we slowly began to rebuild. Sarah and David worked on their marriage, attending therapy, learning to communicate, to trust again. I worked on forgiving, on letting go of the anger and hurt. It wasn't linear. Some days were better than others. But we were trying. And that, I suppose, was all we could do. A year has passed since that terrifying Friday morning. I'm sitting in my garden now, the late afternoon sun warm on my face, surrounded by roses in full bloom. Their fragrance fills the air, sweet and soothing. Sarah and David are inside making dinner. They visit every week now, and while our relationship isn't exactly what it was before, it's something new. Something more honest, perhaps. We've learned to talk about the hard things, to not hide behind pleasantries and assumptions. David has forgiven Sarah, though he admits there are moments when doubt creeps in. That's normal, their therapist told them. Rebuilding trust is a process. Sarah has learned to set boundaries, to say no when she needs to prioritize her own well-being alongside her compassion for others. And me, I've learned that people are complicated, that even those we love can make terrible choices, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing not to let bitterness consume you. I think about Diane sometimes. I wonder where she is, if she's found peace, if she's built a life that's truly hers. I hope she has. I don't hate her. I did for a while. But anger is exhausting, and I'm too old to carry that weight. She was a broken person who did a broken thing. I hope she's healing. I hope she's learned that you can't steal someone else's life and expect it to fit. You have to create your own. I've also learned something important about myself. I'm stronger than I thought. When I was confronted with danger, with deception, I didn't fall apart. I acted. I protected my family. And in the aftermath, when everything felt shattered, I chose to rebuild rather than walk away. That takes courage. I didn't know I had it, but I do. Sarah comes out onto the porch, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. She hands me one and sits beside me on the bench. Thanks for letting us come over, Mom. I smile at her. You're always welcome. You know that. She nods, sipping her drink. I know things aren't perfect, but I'm grateful we're still trying. Me too, I say. We sit in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip lower in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink. Inside, David is humming along to a song on the radio, and the sound drifts out through the open window. It's a small moment, unremarkable in many ways, but it's ours, and it's real. And that's enough. I've learned that life is rarely simple. People make mistakes. Families are messy. Trust can be broken, and with effort slowly repaired. Love isn't always easy, but it's worth fighting for. And sometimes the greatest strength is found not in never falling, but in choosing to stand back up. So what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have called the police immediately? Would you have confronted Diane? Would you have been able to forgive Sarah? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose compassion, courage, and healing. Take care of yourselves and each other.